Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, forget about your intellectual properties. We like dummy properties on this show. Patra has the map, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society has the map with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. I do feel like we have a little bit of Dumb and Dumber energy going. Maybe that's just because I spilled water on myself, right?
You did
before
spill
we were
water
about
on
to
yourself,
record.
yeah. I do feel we're a little like punchy birds today. I don't know why.
I don't know why either.
We just got like we got some goofs here.
Mhm.
Mark, I was going to say that obviously we both got sick a couple weeks ago, and then we have both been like fighting back coughs for kind of a while, and I feel like we're mostly over it. But every time I have to launch into like a long string of like words that I say for the show, I'm like worried. I'm like, it's gonna come. It's gonna interrupt the flow here, and I'm gonna lose control.
Well, my husband is sick right now.
Oh,
I know, and I haven't got anything.
just saw him on Monday.
Yeah. How are you feeling?
How did I feel?
Yeah. How do you feel
now?
now? Yeah.
I feel fine now.
Okay,
I feel
good.
good now.
Yeah.
Like a silly goose,
Uh-huh.
a punch-drunk bird.
So, yeah, he's sick right now,
Mhm.
and I so far have avoided it, but I think I have a little residual fear from the last time I was
Right,
sick and that
right.
lingering cough that seemed to just like go on forever.
Just forever and ever.
Yeah,
And I think like we're both better now, and so let's just like be better, right?
agreed.
I don't think it's time for us to be sick anymore.
No.
It's time for us to be good.
Yeah,
And
and good we shall be.
Good we shall be as
We're shaking hands over the table.
That's right. But also wearing masks and then
And
sanitizing our hands. That's right. If people would like to support us in our hand sanitization and mask wearing, you can head on over to patreon.com/Nintendo Cartridge Society, where if you are supporting us at the 8-bit or 16-bit levels, you get access to our once-a-month episodes of miniseries like NCS Arcade.
Yes, where Patrick and I are mostly playing games we've never beaten before. And for this month, for February, we are talking about Toe Jam and Earl, the Sega Genesis game.
Right, and that episode will be coming out on Saturday, which you say, hey, isn't that maybe Saturday or Sunday? We haven't nailed it down yet. Hey, isn't that March? Sure, that's March.
Yeah,
It's
got us.
It's the February. Yeah, you got us. Congratulations. But yes, it's that'll be our February episode. Very excited to talk Toe Jam and Earl with you, Mark.
Yeah, me as well. And everybody who follows us on Patreon at any level, including the free level,
Mhm.
has access to our listener feedback episodes, which in some ways, this is a preview. Today's episode is going to be a
Right.
preview of what you get in those listener feedback episodes.
Do you like the vibe of this, where we're like proclaiming ourselves to be like a little bit looser?
Uh-huh.
And like taking your feedback and like talking about what you have to say about things, because that's what the listener feedback episodes are.
Yes, after every episode of NCS Arcade, we solicit emails, Discord messages, thoughts about the game we just played, and then we respond to those. And again, anybody who follows us on Patreon, even at the free level, have access to those. And they're a lot of fun because we, respond to the stuff.
We've had fresh thoughts in the meantime.
And then, we also just talk about other stuff as well. So
Yes.
it's a lot of fun.
So check that out. The Donkey Kong Arcade Trilogy one is in the free Patreon feed right now. You can also, another thing you can do for free is you can send us an email, Nintendo Cartridge Society
At gmail.com.
Really about anything, but specifically I was teeing up, if you would like to join our Discord, email us. I will send you an invitation. And then you hang out with us in Discord. Mark, are you ready to get into our main topic and kind of revisit some of the things that came to light after our discussion about IPs and franchises on Nintendo platforms?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think you and I thought that the conversation was going to be as long as it was.
No, not at all.
Perhaps foolishly, we were like, this is fine. We got this. We know what Nintendo franchise is. We've been playing this thing for 40 years.
Yeah.
Like, we'll be fine. And I would say that in a lot of ways we were fine. But maybe not totally comprehensive. And there are like some sort of like questions that bubble up when you are talking about franchises and where franchises start and like what actually constitutes a franchise specifically. So I feel like there's just a lot of ground for us to like sort of revisit and sort of like tamp down our own personal definitions of a lot of things.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was great to get all of like the thoughts and emails and feedback
Yes.
and everything about this episode. It's a great reason to join our Discord because there was a lot of good discussion about things we missed or things that we like purposefully excluded. But because that episode, like last week when we were talking about new IP slash franchises, and we'll have to get into that a little bit more
Right.
later, we had some specific like rules that we laid down. And so that meant that some games that I think definitely qualify as a new IP or a new franchise, we just didn't talk about. But this week, it's kind of a good excuse to go back, thanks to listener feedback, and talk about some of those things that we omitted last time, or
Yeah.
just plumb forgot about.
Oh, yes. Or just saw and then willfully ignored.
That's right.
Look, man, there's only so many Pokemon spin-offs I can talk about, right? Before I'm like, I don't know.
Especially because we know so little.
We know so little about
About
Pokemon,
Pokemon.
spin-offs and Pokemon in general. That's all true. But so I think first, I believe we've been posed with two big questions.
Okay.
So let's address the big questions first. The first big question comes from Drew Mackey. Drew writes, in the most recent episode, you talked about how games like Yoshi's Island and Super Mario Land 3 are weird because it's not clear if they mark the debut of a new franchise. Why not debate it out? List the pros and cons, and then establish that the NCS canon states how to regard these games moving forward. Like, is Yoshi's Island the beginning of the franchise, or is Yoshi's story? You and I encountered this question as we were doing the exercise. And we didn't really talk about Wario Land that much, which would be the Super Mario Land 3. And then Yoshi's Island, we did talk, yes, Yoshi's Island as Super Mario World 2, or even Super Mario Yoshi's Island, as it's known in Japan. But we sort of landed on like a wishy-washy, they are both part of the series and the beginning of a new series at the same time. And kind of justified that by saying that, like, well, the first Mario game is a Donkey Kong game.
Right.
Right? But let's revisit this idea. Because, is Super Mario Land 3 the third Super Mario Land game, or is it, in fact, Wario Land?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Maybe a way to think about this for us is like a backdoor pilot in a TV show.
Yeah.
So I actually don't know if they're that common nowadays, but in television history, there was this idea of like, okay, we're going to do a spin-off of like a show and use some of the characters, spin off to a new show based in that same universe. And the way that we're going to do that is basically dedicate an episode of the main show to setting up this spin-off.
Yes. And I think these probably do still happen, right? Like Blackish had a bunch of spin-offs. Like I have to assume that a lot of those spin-offs started as like backdoor pilots, but like, a sort of famous one from this century anyway, is like that episode of The Office where they're just at Dwight's farm the whole time. They were working on a series that was going to be just called The Farm. And when the pilot didn't get picked up, they like recut it and like put some more Office specifics in it and aired it as an episode of The Office. So like, yeah, and it is crazy to think that at some point they were like, in this episode of Happy Days, we're gonna meet an alien, and then that'll be Mork and Mindy,
right.
But like, when you come up against Robin Williams, you got to be like, well, we have to find a way to put this energy on TV, right?
But let's use that as an example.
Yes.
If you're doing a whole series rewatch of Mork and Mindy, like, does
yes, I see what
that
you're saying.
Happy Days backdoor pilot count as an episode of the show? Now, sorry, one additional wrinkle to add to this is that those were done intentionally, right? Whereas it's I don't know the intention of the creation of Yoshi's Island, that it's like, hey, we're seeding the idea for a Yoshi spinoff, or if that just, it feels more likely to me that that was just like an outgrowth of Yoshi's Island.
Sure. Well, so like I think the frustrating answer is, of course, it's both, right? If I were doing a playthrough of the entire Super Mario Land series, I would play 3 games. Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins, and Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land. If I were playing the Wario Land series, playing all those games, I would start with Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land. And it just like occupies both of those spaces at once. If I were buying a like DVD set of Mork and Mindy, I might expect that episode of Happy Days to be included in the special features, but I don't think I would expect it to be like the first episode on the disc.
Right. I agree with that. I also think
Are we alienating everyone by talking about DVDs of TV shows or Mork and Mindy in the first place?
Mork and Mindy. My goodness. Okay, the other part that I would add to this is that I think, like, even during the recording of the previous episode, we talked about this because I originally had Yoshi's Story on the Nintendo 64 as the start of the new IP,
and I sort of like pushed for Yoshi's Island to be the beginning of the IP.
Right. And for Yoshi's Island specifically, and like Yoshi's Island and then what the Yoshi series became,
right,
it's like they're very different. Like Yoshi's Story basically takes the idea of Yoshi in a platformer and expands on that.
It gives
and makes
it rules,
kind of its
right?
own. Right. I mean,
like it gives it specific rules, right? Of like, this is slower pace. It's about reaching the end, having collected a certain number of things, not getting hit, and then like seeing a scoreboard at the end. Like these are all like staples of the Yoshi series that are established in that first game.
And yet, a lot of those elements are part of the DNA of Yoshi's Island.
Yes.
Maybe not, they're not like fleshed out in the explicit way that they are in Yoshi's Story.
Oh, yes.
But the idea of like a slower platformer where you're taking your time and you're exploring and like all that sort of thing, that's definitely part of Yoshi's Island and what makes Yoshi's Story feel like there's clear lineage there.
Right. Okay. So, what do you think is so Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land, is that the start of the Wario Land series or not? I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I think yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it is also the end of the Wario Land series, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island is the beginning of the Yoshi series and also the end of the Super Mario World series.
So I kind of disagree on. Actually, I don't even know if I disagree. Because I think like the lineage is clearly there. I think that to me, Yoshi's Story is really the start.
Oh, that is interesting.
The of like the Yoshi franchise as we know it.
Okay.
But it really goes back to what you were saying about Mork and Mindy, where it would be great to have Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island on the DVD of, the complete Yoshi's like series. But I don't think that it's like the true pilot. I think the true pilot is Yoshi's Story.
But I guess I just disagree. Like I think that in the case of both Wario Land and Yoshi's Island, that those only have the complicated names they have because they didn't know how to sell a game starting with the word Wario or a game starting with the word Yoshi.
Well, to be technical, Wario Land does start with Wario because Wario Land : Super Mario Land 3 is the title of that game.
It's Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land, right?
I don't think so.
We got to look this up. But Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island is in fact the name of that game.
Yes.
But hold on, let's look up Super Mario Land 3. Okay.
It's like an Emio the Smiling Man situation where they
It-
bury
yeah,
the
you're
Famicom
right, you're
Detective
right.
Club. So it's like the lineage is acknowledged,
Right.
but
right.
they are also trying to sell it as a brand new thing.
Okay, so I stand corrected here. But so then do you think that Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 is in fact a Super Mario Land game or not? I feel like they only have these names of like the previous franchise to sell a game that they don't have like the utter confidence
I
in.
think you're totally right. I think it's a marketing thing for sure.
Right.
Where it's to ease the audience into the idea and like get people who necessarily wouldn't buy a Wario game because what's Wario,
Right.
or wouldn't buy a Yoshi game because where is Mario?
Yes.
Why is he this baby that's crying?
Why is he a crying baby? Well, and like we are going to get around to talking about Star Tropics 2 in a little bit, but like that game is sold as Zoda's Revenge. And I think there are two reasons for that. But one of them is that Star Tropics itself isn't a known brand. So putting that at the beginning and being like, it's a sequel to the game nobody played, like makes it sort of not a selling point.
Do you think? Okay, so Wario Land: Super Mario Land 3 came out in 1994.
Boy, that is throwing me for a loop, by the way. The title is like a mirror image of what I thought it was.
And then Super Mario World 2: Yoshi's Island was released in 1995.
Okay.
So, do you think it is possible that they, and I don't really believe this, but do you think it's because they made more Wario Lands,
Right.
but that they were like, whoa, the response to Wario Land, that scares us. So let's flip this around
Right.
and go back to leading with Super Mario World. So that way people don't freak out when they see this like crayon drawing Yoshi's Island type thing. Like, I think you're right that it was probably like a safety net
Yeah, totally.
type thing.
Right. Well, and you know, like the first two, like Super Mario World is one of the best-selling games on Super NES. Like the sequel to it is going to sell well, right? The Mario Land games sold really well on Game Boy, so like the third one of those is also going to sell well.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. It's so the reason. So here's something.
Because we have to come to an agreement.
We
have
do
to
have
come
to come to
a
an
canonical decision.
I think it may depend on whether we are talking about a franchise or an IP. Now, you and I danced around using IP in our discussions about this because there's something about talking about Nintendo's IPs that feels to me, I'm speaking for myself here, feels a little like faux industry insider kind of thing where it's like all of these IPs, I don't know, there's something about like that lingo that feels like either like fake or corporate, or I don't love it.
Yeah, it's very business jargony.
Yes.
I think it's really interesting that IP
It's useful though.
has-
It's a
it-
useful term.
It is, and I think it's interesting that it's crossed over
Yes.
to just everybody uses the term IP.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly what that means, but I think it's bad. Like, it's
I do
nobody's
too,
fault.
yes.
I don't think people are wrong for using it, but I think it speaks to like
the
where
state of media.
the state
Yeah.
of media.
Yeah.
And I don't think it says particularly good things. But I use it all the time. Like, we use it all the time when
Totally.
we're talking about this stuff, because it is a very specific idea. This, like, what is an intellectual property? It's different from a franchise.
Yes, which is the point that I'm driving towards here, in that like Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 is a distinct IP, right? Because we get Wario and we get Wario's new enemies, we get Wario's new power-ups, we get Wario's priorities, and like that's all different and new. All of the things that make the IP are established there. They're expounded upon in future games.
Mhm.
But I feel the same way about Yoshi's Island too, right? We've got like, okay, there's a little bit more of like a kiddie aesthetic. We got monkeys throwing spitting watermelon seeds at you, and like Shy Guys on stilts, and flower petals that you need to collect, and your life is little like stars. All of these things, like that's the IP. The IP, I think, unequivocally starts in Super Mario World 2 and Super Mario Land 3.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I have no argument against that. I think that makes sense.
But does the franchise start there?
Well, the original
The original prompt.
the original
was IP.
prompt was IP. And so if we were looking at the new IP that was introduced in the Super Nintendo era, I think it is very fair to include Yoshi's Island as new IP because like you said, it introduces all of these hallmarks of the series that would eventually become a franchise of its own.
Right. And at this point, are we just like circling the semantic drain here? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, let's just flush the discussion.
Let's just flush the discussion because I'm sorry, Drew. I don't know that there is a solid answer to this.
Oh, really? I thought we had landed on one.
I think the answer that I think it's the beginning of the IP for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the beginning of the franchise necessarily.
Interesting. Well, I would say it is in the same way that a backdoor pilot is the beginning of a series.
Yes.
So I think what we're coming down on canonically is that both Yoshi's Island and Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3 are the beginning of the IP.
Right. Just as Super Mario Advance : Super Mario Brothers 2 is the beginning of the Super Mario Advance franchise. I guess it's not really a different IP, is it though?
No, well, and we'll get into this a little bit with
in a second.
The next comment, but I think I feel good about that.
Great. So the next big question comes from Wolarius on the Discord. Says this episode good so far. I'm about halfway. Just one comment: isn't Super Mario 64 a new franchise? I feel like Mario 3D and 2D are different enough. The only overlap I can think of would be Mario 3D Land. Same comment for Zelda 3D versus Zelda 2D.
So this is definitely where we stepped on our own toes by talking about them as franchises instead of just going with IP, because the reason that we didn't talk about Mario or Zelda is, one, they were introduced in like the NES era,
right?
And we weren't talking about IP or franchises. Ugh, I'll just go with IP.
It's tough.
that were introduced in the NES era, but it's like, yes, 3D Mario introduced new elements and new gameplay mechanics. So I think you could argue that it's a new franchise, but it's not a new IP. Mario's
still jumping on Goombas,
like
right?
3D Mario to me is not a new and distinct IP from like other Mario platformers. We did make a distinction for like Mario Tennis and Mario Golf and that sort of thing.
Right. But these are different kinds of games, like down to the like genre level, right?
Right.
And I guess you could argue that a 3D Mario is different from a 2D Mario on a genre level as well. But like, there's something about like the IP that feels consistent. Mario's still jumping on Goombas, right?
Right.
Still fighting Bowser probably at the end.
And
you could almost argue that like Super Mario Brothers 2 is new IP.
Right, but then it like loops back in on itself because they start incorporating elements from Super Mario Brothers 2 into the other games. And then I also think it also raises the question of, what do we do with Galaxy at that point? Like, is that its own?
Right.
Like, you could argue it's its own franchise, but I wouldn't argue it's its own IP.
Right. Well, and then like 3D Land and 3D World, like, are they there? And maybe Bowser's Fury goes in that same bucket. But is Bowser's Fury actually a little bit more Odyssey than it is the other games? And then what do you do with the new Super Mario Brothers games? It's obviously like a sub-series within the main series. It has its own like kind of IP qualities.
It became the look of Mario and
absolutely
the Mushroom Kingdom for a decade, 2 decades.
And we mentioned the advanced games. That's where we're introducing like the idea that like of these Mario characters have little voice clips, and like, you know, it's kind of an outcropping of the Super Mario Brothers Deluxe on the Game Boy Color. And so like I think you can draw a super complicated like web of like series and sub-series and offshoots and spin-offs, and how they like feed back into each other, and like, you know, I think the original Super Mario Brothers trilogy is probably the original Super Mario Brothers, the Lost Levels, and then Super Mario Land. You know what I mean? And then like you do a different set of games that's Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario Land 2, and then Super Mario World. Like that, in my mind, like that's another, like you could call those series, but they're made up of like other parts of other series. And I think it's just one of those things where it's like, these are all part of the same IP.
Yeah, I agree. And ultimately, I think I think it's fair to call them different franchises if you want to, but just like you were saying, Patrick, I think within the Mario canon,
Yes.
there are so many different permutations and like ways that you could group things together. I think ultimately it just comes down to, for me, the final like rule that we had set out at the beginning of last week's episode, which is we know it when we see it.
Yeah, sure.
And that was just a call that we made that that's all just part of the same IP, but we used IP and franchise like
Kinda
interchangeably in
yeah.
that episode, which is
regrettable.
confusing.
We'll say it's regrettable.
Yeah.
We regret it. We're
So-
not apologizing.
So Mario and Zelda, 2D, 3D, whatever like permutation of those for Mario platforming games and Zelda, like adventure games, I would say those
Right.
are all the same IP. So introducing 3D Mario, introducing 3D Zelda does not create new IP, but you could absolutely argue that they're new franchises.
Right. Just as I think you could argue that like there's a franchise in Zelda that is just Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks.
Right, or Link to the Past likes.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the like Four Swords and Triforce Heroes, right? Where it's just like these sorts of specific flavors of the franchise within the franchise that like obviously owe a debt to the version of it that came before. We did throw down Metroid Prime as a separate IP, right?
Yeah, I think we did, and I think it's another smell test type thing.
Right. And maybe we botched that one. I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe we're wrong.
Maybe that was part of the Metroid IP and was just like a sub franchise within it. We didn't talk about like Metroid Other M, for example, like
Right.
its own flavor of Metroid with its own priorities, its own cast, and all this like other stuff that's like not present in the rest of the games. Should that have been a separate IP too? And it's again just like another like we know it when we see it, or maybe we don't. A lot of judgment calls here.
Yeah.
And just a lot of things that like don't quite make sense as franchises or not.
For sure.
Anything else on the topic of these two big questions, Mark?
No, I don't think so.
All right, well, let's move on to the smaller questions, the arguably nitty-gritty questions people brought up about games that either we skipped over or that we skipped over because we just thought they, or like digital-only games or whatever. So the first comment comes from Alana in the Discord. She says, I was thinking about the episode this morning. Was Pokemon Coliseum mentioned in the ep? I feel like those games could be considered sequels/spiritual successors to the Pokemon Stadium games. Interesting. And you and I talked about this earlier in the episode. There's only so much room in our brain for Pokemon stuff.
I just totally forgot about it when I
Yeah.
was compiling the list. I totally missed it.
Well, and so Pokemon Coliseum is sort of like a stadium game, but is also like a little bit like a just RPG with Pokemon characters in its own right?
Right.
And then so like, is that also like a prequel to Pokemon Conquest, the 3DS tactics game with Pokemon in it?
Interesting.
Do you know what I mean? Like, there's it's Pokemon, and I wish that they would do more of these kinds of things because that feels like a kind of RPG that I would be more interested in playing than just like a straight up Pokemon game. But yeah, it seems like they haven't really like dipped into that well for a while.
Yes. And it feels like with the Switch being a hybrid console, I am not sure that we will.
Sure, right. Well, I mean, it's no one brought it up, but I'll bring it up now. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. We didn't talk about it at all. A Game Boy Advance and DS game. They've released like simultaneously, right? And then we got a remake of them on Switch. And it's like, that's possibly the beginning of another franchise that they haven't ever followed up on, except for that one remake.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I mean that's just like kind of another look. We don't know that much about Pokemon.
Yeah, are there other Pokemon spin-offs or new
Probably.
IP lingering in the shadows?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Well,
probably.
That's the biggest question, right? Is like what of these are actually new IP, right?
Right.
Because they all just include the Pokemon characters.
That's true. What did we end up doing with Stadium? Did we
I
nix
did-
it,
yeah,
or
did we
did
count-
we?
No, I think we
Let's
counted it because
see.
there were 3 of them.
Yeah, I think we did count it.
I think it's very funny to be like, did we count it? Because what does it mean for it to count or not
We also
count?
counted. Oh, you're right. I guess we weren't really. Well, I mean, we did cut some stuff.
We did.
So, but yeah, Pokemon Snap was in here as well. So yeah, I mean, Pokemon Coliseum. Yeah, we just missed it. Probably should have been on here.
Yep.
Probably should have kept it. Whatever that meant.
Probably should have
And,
talked about these other Pokemon sub franchises
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, not. I still pretty sternly think not new IP, new
not
franchise for sure.
New
but,
franchise for sure.
and the rescue. What are they called? I said their name already. Rescue team. Rescue.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Dungeon, the
Mystery
Pokemon-
Dungeon.
Mystery
Dungeon.
Wait, are they actually called Mystery Dungeon? Oh no. Well, anyway, moving on from Pokemon.
Well, also, isn't Mystery Dungeon? I mean, if we're dabbling in things we
Yeah,
don't
okay,
really know what we're
let's do it.
talking about, isn't Mystery Dungeon in and of itself a existing series, and then Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is just like a Pokemon version of
yes.
Mystery Dungeon?
Okay, well, so Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a spin-off video game. I'm just reading from Wikipedia here.
Perfect.
From the mainline Pokemon series developed by Spike Chunsoft, formerly Chunsoft. Game features fictional characters, blah, 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 blah. Common to Mystery Dungeon games. Mystery Dungeon, known as Fushigi no Dungeon, is a series of roguelike role-playing video games. So yes,
Okay.
Mystery Dungeon is also its own thing.
Okay.
So obviously, I guess like Pokemon just has like a history of mashing up their own stuff. So maybe Pokemon Mystery Dungeon to Pokemon Conquest, which was also like a mashup with a strategy series, and then like maybe the third step in that is like Pokken Tournament, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's like a Tekken game with Pokemon
Yeah.
characters.
I'd buy it.
Um,
I mean, not the game, but
No.
the idea that you're putting forth.
hey, I'd play that free demo though. All right. Anyway, let's move off of Pokemon.
Okay.
And into different places where we don't know what we're talking about. Julette SQ in the Discord writes in and says, I would also be interested to hear you guys talk more about Style Savvy. So Mark, do you you made kind of a face because
Well, just because
Yes.
I didn't play any of the games, and when they were releasing on the Nintendo DS originally, I would say more in like a like gamer phase. I had an Xbox 360 and then
Sure.
a PS3 and like a Wii, but I was playing a lot of Fallout 3 and
I love the way you said Fallout just then.
yeah, I'm trying to
Fallout
think of other like
3.
and other games, but like I was all in on broad swaths of video gaming, but this was not a title that I think I was even really aware of at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and there are so many. And I am not implying here that Style Savvy is this, but there were so many like kind of shovelware, kind of just like stupid looking games on DS that like I feel like my guard was up, right? Where I was like, I'm just gonna play the things that I know are like Nintendo-y games, and so I was playing Brain Age and Nintendogs and stuff like that. But there's just like a lot of shovelware kind of stuff, and so I didn't recognize Style Savvy as something from Nintendo. In the PAL regions, the series is known as Nintendo Presents: Style Boutique. So I think that may have gotten me if they had been like, this is a Nintendo game. And then, of course, in Japan, it's called Wagamama Fashion Girls Mode. Just, a little bit of extra information. But they made 4 of these games, one on DS and 3 more on 3DS. And, like you said, like, I don't know, they just, I was not, it was not being marketed to me. And was just more into more like gamer games as much as it like makes me like cringe to say that.
Right. Yeah, totally. We were also like 20 years old, so
That's a great point.
We just
Right.
weren't in the target demographic for it at the time.
The games are developed by a developer called Sin Sophia, who released a game, like a fashion game called Fashion Dream on Switch in 2023, but no longer being published by Nintendo, by Marvelous in Japan and Europe, and then X by Xseed in North America. and Xseed publishes a lot of those like anime style games, so I think it is just kind of a Japanese focus for the franchise now.
Yeah. Sorry, Juliet. I wish I had more
Yep.
information or insight to share. It's just something that I've never experienced before.
Moving on. AC posed the question: did you cover, and if not, could you cover Kuru Kuru Kururin?
So, I originally had this on the list, but I removed it, maybe incorrectly, because we had a rule that was no puzzle games. There's lots of puzzle games
Sure.
that
right.
we just did not talk
Dr.
about.
Mario, Yoshi's Cookie, Wario's Woods.
All
of those started on the NES. But yes, go on.
But this listener feedback episode is a perfect time to talk about it. I don't know anything about this series other than there was one recently released on Nintendo Switch Online, right?
Right. So it's are there multiples in the series of Kuru,
I
Kuru,
believe there
Kururin?
is, yeah.
So if you could look that up.
Yeah.
The only one I've played is the one that was on Game Boy Advance and which has been released on Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack. It is a weird little game where you play as a bird in a spinning spaceship, and the spaceship itself is just like a rod, and it spins, and your whole job is to guide the ship through these little mazes without hitting the walls. And sometimes it means you have to like rush through a narrow corridor at just the right time so that like the ship, as it unendingly rotates, doesn't hit the walls. And you can go into little areas that will like reverse the flow of the thing, or like it hits bumpers and then can go the other way. And it's a cool, fun, kind of like addictive puzzle game. Which I like. Mark, did you find out if there are more of them?
There are 2
Okay.
Japan-only sequels.
Got it. Okay. Which is, I think, a roadblock that we run up against from time to time, where it's like, if most of the series is in Japan, we don't really have too much, don't have much of a reason to have anything to say about them.
It's called Kururin Paradise and Kururin Squash. But it looks like all 3 were released on Game Boy Advance, and I don't think that there's been
interesting
an entry since then.
But it's it's definitely a franchise that started and is now dead, right?
Yep.
Hasn't
an
been
IP even.
Right, an IP even.
Yeah.
Next up on the Discord from Drew Mackey again, Drew Mackey for you, says, Starfy? Can Starfy's existence be acknowledged? And I guess, sure.
So the reason I didn't have Starfy on the list, and I think this was incorrect, but the reason I didn't have it on the list was because I thought all the games were Japan exclusives.
And this is not true, only in that the most recent game in the series, which was still from 2008, 2009, is a DS game, and that one was released internationally.
Okay.
But the 4 previous games, 3 GBA games and 1 DS game, were only released in Japan. In recent times, the 3 GBA games have come to Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack. The Starfy games are strange, right? You play as this little star guy who's cute. There's like a very Kirby-esque quality to it. Did you mess around with any of these, Mark?
I haven't.
So you are like running around in a kind of like, Kirby's probably the best analog, but there's also like some sort of like Metroidvania-iness to it. But all of the like individual like keys and locks that you would see in a Metroid game revolve around like little tasks you need to do for characters you encounter in the world, which, like, interesting kind of hook there, right? Makes it feel a little bit more dynamic and what have you. But on Nintendo Switch Online, the games aren't translated, so like it. I played for maybe an hour and a half and was like, I don't know what's going on, what people are asking me to do. So I bet they're cool. But I've not really been able to actively play any of these games.
Do you think the reason why it was released in the Nintendo DS era was because there were so many? It was like Blue Ocean Strategy.
So many,
like
DSs
you said, it's
out
like,
there, yeah.
and it's like a Kirby-esque game. So that means that, to me anyways, that it would be welcoming to like new gamers or people that like
Yeah,
want
totally.
a not as challenging game.
Yes.
And so it's like the DS is a great time to try that
Yeah,
if you're trying to
totally.
introduce something to the US.
I mean, with the same like casting a wider net for an audience like Style Savvy, right? That we mentioned before. That they were just like, yep, put these games out everywhere. I wish that there was a translation for the GBA ones on NSO, because I think they would be fun to play. But I'm not going to go through whatever hassle of like using a translation app or whatever to play Starfy.
Right.
Starfy developed by Tosei, who did the Game and Watch Gallery games, Virtual Boy Tennis, and then they've done like Square and Capcom remake stuff. So just a little more context for Starfy.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, also Drew mentions, as far as the Super NES, I'd suggest Panel de Pon, which is a puzzle game, but which is infused with a lot of character, and is also Nintendo's girliest franchise this side of Style Savvy. It's a really interesting choice on Nintendo's part to brand a puzzle game as super feminine, and then let the West see that aspect of it sometimes. So Panel de Pon, when it was eventually did come to North America later, it came out as Tetris Attack, and had Nintendo like Mario characters in place of all of the Panel de Pon little like fairy characters.
Of course, during that time they would take,
right.
Like Drew says, one of Nintendo's girliest franchises, and rename it Tetris Attack.
Tetris Attack. Yeah, not a Tetris game. Very little attacking happening. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun puzzle game, like Falling Block style puzzle game. It is also available on Nintendo Switch Online and is imminently playable without speaking Japanese. But there's a ton of there. So you play as all these different like fairy characters, and they like battle in this puzzle game way against each other, and they have all this like color text that they say to each other. And of course, I don't know what any of it means, but it is kind of cool and exciting to have all these different fairy characters that are like themed to different like elements and like like the night and the day and ice and all this kind of stuff. It's just yeah, it's cool stuff, and kind of a bummer that they've never really revisited these Panel de Pon fairies.
I feel like they don't. Actually, check me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't really feel like they dabble in puzzle games very much anymore.
Ooh,
like
well,
new
you're forgetting
puzzle
Sushi
franchises.
Striker: The Way of the Sushido,
well,
of course.
Yes, constantly, all the time. Am I forgetting that game?
No, but I think you are generally right. Like, the puzzle games that they put out now are the ones. All right, they kind of don't, but like they let other people put out puzzle games now, I guess. I always I see a weird, not straight line between the Panel de Pon fairy characters and the Sprixies in Super Mario 3D
Oh,
World.
I can see that. Yeah.
That it's just like little fairy characters who are like primary color based and sure are cute. That's it.
I bet they're like, we can't read it because it's Japanese, but I bet they're so foul mouthed.
Oh, I bet they
in Panel de Pon.
Mm-hmm. I bet they're just filthy. Moving on. The last prompt from Drew Mackey is, I guess I'd be down to hear you two discuss Star Tropics in any form, but especially as a failed franchise that didn't exist beyond the NES. Yes, we did not bring up Star Tropics because we were starting in the post-NES, post-Game Boy era, but yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about
Star Tropics. The first one came out in 1990. The second one came out in 1994. If I always forget, is it the last NES game that Nintendo published or the second to last?
It's right up there. It's
that,
one of those two. Zoda's Revenge.
That's right. It's Zoda's Revenge and Wario's Woods were the last NES games to be published. Mark is looking it up now.
Second to last.
Wario's
Woods is the last. Let's commit that to memory.
Let's commit that. Wario alphabetically not last, because Zoda's Revenge would be would be alphabetically last.
Right.
But it is in published order last.
Perfect. That'll be so easy for us to remember now.
So easy to remember. And Zoda's Revenge, Star Tropics 2, is what was not released outside of North America. A Japanese developed game, but not released in Japan, which I think has something to do with why they didn't make more of these games. Also, I think just not that popular.
Yeah, I don't think that the original Star Tropics was released in Japan either.
I think it was, but I
So
might be wrong.
the I'm pretty sure Star Tropics was released in North America and Europe, but didn't make it to Japan maybe until like maybe it's on Virtual Console or something. I'm not sure.
That makes some sense.
And so, but maybe Zoda's
Yeah, you're
Revenge
right,
didn't
you're
even
right.
make it to Europe. Like maybe Zoda's Revenge was just US release only.
It is also just like such a late, obviously, NES game where it's like, and they didn't, Wario's Woods, they would release versions of it on Super NES and maybe Game Boy as well. But like Zoda's Revenge, they're like, nope, that's it. It's locked to the regular old NES.
But we've talked about Star Tropics on the show previously, but if you aren't familiar with it, because there's very good reason you wouldn't be,
Mhm.
Star Tropics is The Legend of Zelda like.
In gameplay, sort of, yes. But with like kind of a heavier emphasis on like top-down platforming action, and then the setting is like a an American boy in the 1980s, the cusp of the 80s and 90s, searching for his uncle. In the first game, it's like in some sort of nondescript seas, high seas, sometimes kind of Caribbean, sometimes Polynesian, like, who knows. And then in the second game, traveling through time.
Yes, and I feel like the first game is really kind of a mashup of like what people outside of the US thought
Yes.
US kids would like. So it's like Mike Jones and he loves baseball and he has red hair and his like uncle or whatever
Is
is
a scientist,
Yeah,
right.
is like a scientist and he's named Dr. Jones, like Indiana Jones.
Right. And then the whole thing ends with aliens, right?
Right.
Like, I feel like all of these things are like, oh yeah, what do Americans like? And that's what Star Tropics will be. And that's like Star Tropics 2. The first game is pretty silly, right? Like there are jokes built into it, and a lot of the solutions to things are like kind of jokey or humorous like takes on it. And by Star Tropics 2, everything is a joke, right? Like all the characters are like very silly. One of the quests in when you're traveling back in time to like ancient Egypt is you're like delivering a pizza for Cleopatra. Like, it's like really dumb stuff, but is like funny in its own right.
And I actually have no concept of how the first game did in the United States or Europe, but I'm guessing not that great. I'm
I
guessing
mean, I owned a copy of it, so for me, it seemed like the biggest game out there.
right.
And that first game does make appearances on the NES Classic Edition and Nintendo Switch Online. But that second game is like it has been released on virtual consoles, but that's about it. It has not been made available for free or part of subscriptions at all since then.
And I think you mentioned it earlier, but I think the fact that it wasn't released in Japan,
Right.
probably has a lot to do with the fact that the series is just kind of like an NES anomaly, because Nintendo as a company is still very like Japan focused,
Right.
and what the Japanese audience is interested in, and it's not Zoda, whatever that is.
It's not Zoda, whatever that is. It's also so both games came out of Nintendo R&D 3, which developed the Punch Out games in arcade, and also Mike Tyson's Punch Out and Pro Wrestling on the NES, which like to me just says that like this is a development arm of Nintendo that was like focused on the US audience, right? And like trying to make games that would be interesting to that specific audience. They the last game they made was Pilot Wing 64 in 1996 when that game came out, and then they kind of just go into hardware development mode for like kind of a really long time, and are renamed as Nintendo Integrated Research and Development, or Nintendo IRD. And all of their credits post 1996 are like transfer pack, rumble pack, expansion pack for the Nintendo 64. Nintendo 64 DD, memory card for the GameCube, a Game Boy Player, the Nunchuck, Wii Zapper, Wii Wheel, Wii Balance Board, Wii Speak. They made all of this
Oh,
hardware
interesting.
for Nintendo during this time, and then they, including sort of like revisions on, like they made the Nintendo 2DS, the new 3DS, and the new 3DS XL. So like cool and important stuff for Nintendo, but none of that is software development. They stopped making games by 1996, only
Yeah.
2 years after Zoda's Revenge comes out. Then they make hardware for the next 20 years, and then they, have been like sort of discontinued as an arm of Nintendo as of 2015. So, obviously, they made Punch Out and Super Punch Out. They didn't make the Wii Punch Out, but like, so that was like one gasp at one of their franchises having a little bit of a comeback. They did the Pilot Wings and Pilot Wings 64. That's not right. Only Pilot Wings 64. And like, there's that Pilot Wings Resort game on 3DS. But like, otherwise, it seems like the franchises that R&D 3 or Nintendo IRD was working on at one point are now just like non-priorities for Nintendo generally.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that is partly because there's nobody in game development anymore that is like from those teams and is advocating for those franchises.
Yeah, totally. There is there was, back when I was on Twitter, a Twitter account that I followed just called Mike from Star Tropics, and it would just like tweet about like heavens, no word of anything Star Tropics in like this many days.
Oh yeah, anytime we had an episode about Star Tropics,
yep,
we would get a retweet from them.
Yeah, would we really?
Yeah. Yep.
I love it. That some people have found their gimmicks. But like, beyond that, there's no love for the series. So
I feel
totally
like
gone.
every once in a while, and maybe actually it's been 15 years since this was the case, but I remember, being online in maybe 2010 and everybody wondering what Retro was working on. And, people on NeoGAF or whatever would be talking about, oh, maybe it's Star Tropics. Maybe they're going to, like they did for Metroid with Metroid Prime, they're going to like reboot Star Tropics.
Yeah, ridiculous. I mean, like Star Tropics is one of those things where like if they announce a new one or a remake, it would be, to me, on par with the like Famicom Detective Club thing, right? And honestly, even less likely, right? Because there's like no Japanese footprint for this thing.
Yeah. Yep.
And then our final question comes from Paul Trans Writes Now and Forever. Paul writes, a couple of 3DS franchises I don't think you mentioned, Box Boy and Pushmo.
So Box Boy, we of course love Box Boy.
We love Box Boy. There are 4 of those games.
So one of the rules was no puzzle games, Box Boy, but also no eShop exclusives, which I thought Box Boy was. I think there was a collection, at least in Japan physically, but we love Box Boy. We can talk about Box Boy.
Let's talk about Box Boy. So the original Box Boy, just like a fun, sort of unassuming puzzle platformer.
Yeah, you play as a little box. Like the graphics are very simple.
Let's say a little box boy
who's named QB.
And spelled
QBBY.
Thank you.
And QB can extend himself by duplicate himself or push him, whatever it is.
That's right.
Like multiple boxes, and then you use that ability to you can extend yourself, let's say 3 boxes, and then you use that ability to puzzle solve your way out of a maze, essentially.
Of little platforming situations. So sometimes you're throwing the boxes onto spikes so you can traverse the path that way. Sometimes you are making a little hook out of your spikes so you can grab onto a ledge and then fall under it. Sometimes you are throwing them to push buttons. They explore every possible permutation of what can you do.
It's a very Nintendo thing to me where
Absolutely.
it's here's a really simple gameplay mechanic, and now let's just blow that out as much as possible.
Right. And so they made 3 of these on 3DS. And Mark, let's try to name them. So there's Box Boy. There's Bye Bye Box Boy.
Yes. And that's the third one.
That's the third one, right.
And what is the second one
I think
called?
the second one is just Box Boy.
Okay,
So I think it's Box Boy, Box Boy, and Bye Bye Box Boy. And then the Switch one is Box Boy plus Box Girl.
Yes, which is very good. You can dress your box characters up
Yes.
in different clothing. There's a baby box.
Yeah,
It's all very good.
It's phenomenal stuff. The Box Boy series, very good.
Uh-huh.
I will say that in any platform or like puzzle game like this, I reach a point where I'm just like, well, I don't know how to figure this one out. And then if you look it up, it's like, okay, then I've made the game nothing. And if you don't look it up and never figure it out, you just stop playing.
Yes, yeah,
That's where
totally.
I hit that point in every single one of these games.
Yeah.
But I've bought them all. There's not a Box Boy game that I don't own.
Yeah, there is a Box Boy or a QB amiibo that was
Yes.
Japan exclusive that you can find listings on eBay for like $500 or $600.
Yes.
And sorely am I tempted just
I know.
for the rarity of it.
It's I mean, it's cool. Mark, don't spend $500 on a QB amiibo. That feels like something we could 3D print, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Also, it would just like go in a closet
Right, next to your Alarmo.
next to my Alarmo.
Next to my Alarmo. So that's Box Boy. We should have brought Box Boy up, especially because he appears on Switch, right? So like, although, what do you think? You think Box Boy dead series at this point? They made one game on Switch and that's it.
Yeah, and it's HAL Laboratory. I don't know. HAL Laboratory.
Yeah, they're weird that
They
way.
also had like
Part-time UFO.
Part-time UFO. So I don't know. I don't know that Box Boy is dead, but it has been a while. It was 2019
Yeah.
when Box Boy and Box Girl. So from 2015 when the first game released to 2019. So in 4 years they released
4 games.
4 games. Plus I'm looking at it now like a Uniqlo and Japan exclusive themed clothing. Box Boy
What?
themed clothing released in 2017.
What?
Plus Uniqlo Cross Hako Boy, a mobile game accessible from Uniqlo's official iOS and Android app. Players do not control QB directly, but instead swipe to create boxes. QB will then attempt to use the boxes the player has made in order to reach the end of a level.
Dude.
It's like Super Mario Run, but for Box Boy.
Are you looking at these Box Boy shirts from Uniqlo?
No.
Oh man, they're so good. I mean,
Is this what we should be spending $600 on?
Look, we're gonna spend $600 on something. Okay, and so that's that. Let's then Pushmo was the other.
You got me with Pushmo. I mean, it's a puzzle game, so technically it wouldn't have made our list, but I know nothing about Pushmo.
Yeah, I played the one that's on Wii U. A little bit again. So it is a puzzle game developed by Intelligent Systems, where you play as this like cute little red guy who like pulls out parts of a level so that he can like climb to the top of it. And it's very like it's puzzles, but it's all puzzles based in sort of your like spatial awareness and like how much you can anticipate what you need to move in order to like climb up some levels. They're fun. But again, it feels very much the same as Box Boy to me, where it's like I'm having fun as long as I can figure them out. When I get to a point where I can't figure it out, I'm frustrated, and if I look it up, then it's like I negated the whole game.
This definitely, I think, does count as a new IP, though. You have Pushmo,
Totally.
a sequel Crashmo, and then Pushmo World.
That's the Wii U one. That's the one I played.
Oh, and one on the 3DS called Stretchmo. So yeah, there were 4 games in the series. But another one that maybe is just a victim of HD development and Intelligent Systems not having the bandwidth anymore for
Sure.
strange things like this. I don't know.
It is interesting that like we, not that Intelligent Systems didn't put out games on Switch, because they definitely did, right? Like I don't know how much they were involved in the like Thousand Year Door remake, but like they must have been to some extent, right? And then we got 2 Fire Emblem games. And
Although they weren't the main developers on Three Houses.
you're right.
They were just like
they were like support to
yeah, like
Bandai
overseeing
Namco,
it.
right?
I think so.
That is a good point.
But we did get Paper Mario: The Origami King, which is also from Intelligent Systems.
Right. But like if you look into Intelligent Systems past, like they're just like cranking out games, right? Especially on like the 3DS and Game Boy Advance era. So yeah, I wonder if maybe like that HD development thing is like a real factor for them. Especially when you just, and we've talked about this a bunch of times, but maybe not for a while, that there is like there's a big difference between like standard definition, like console game development and HD game development. The gulf is so much bigger between DS and 3DS development and like HD game development. It's just huge, right? The resolution of a 3DS is so poor that like your models do not need to have a lot of detail. In fact, they will look bad with a lot of detail. So like when Miitopia, for example, was remade in HD for Switch, like that's a big undertaking to transfer it to the new. Also true of Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, right? And yeah, so I wonder if they were just like, we can't do it. We can't produce at the same.
Yeah, and it's just getting
quality.
harder and more
Quantity.
difficult
Right.
to make big HD games, and everything on Switch has to look good on a TV. So,
Yep.
I mean, except Nintendo 64 games, which look like butt.
Yes. Yes. All right, Mark, any final thoughts here? That's all the feedback that we got. Thank you to everyone who wrote in either on Discord or emailed us. It is good to get all these like other
Yeah,
perspectives
it's
on these
always
things.
fun to have these continuing discussions on episodes that we put out there, and there was so much to talk about here. And hey, if we are still missing some IP, or
No, this is the last time we do
no,
an episode.
no,
about
I
this.
would follow up on this. You know, we it could just be at the top of an episode. We don't have to dedicate a whole episode to it.
That's a great
But
point. Yes.
yeah,
Let us know.
I would
Email
love to
us
hear more.
Nintendo Cartridge Society
At gmail.com.
But that is here's a good point, Mark. I'm gonna say
I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it.
until Nintendo reveals the Switch 2 and the game lineup, we're going to be kind of like searching out for episode topics. So if we revisit this idea again in the next 4 weeks, then that's why.
Well, here's another thing.
Yeah.
You can send us topic ideas
You can
because
send us topic ideas.
the whole IP topic came from a listener.
Yep.
And we always love that.
All right, Mark, let's close this out. Okay, that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our 16-bit patrons, Connor McCabe, Patrice Millette, Kyle Seaborn, Drew Mackey. We appreciate you. We appreciate everyone who's listening to us, who's emailing us, who's in on the Discord, interacting with us in any way. It makes the whole show better. Join the Discord. All you gotta do is email us, and we'll send you an invitation. Anthony DeLuca made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying thank you for listening.